There's a family you have never heard of that made the Sacklers look like amateurs. A dynasty that did not just profit from addiction. They industrialized it, weaponized it, and turned an entire nation into their customer base. The Sackler family, the ones behind OxyContin, destroyed hundreds of thousands of American lives and made $20 billion before anyone stopped them. But a century before that, another family did the exact same thing on a scale 10 times larger. They addicted millions. They destroyed generations. They shaped the entire economy of Asia. And when it was over, when the bodies were counted and the damage was done, they did not go to prison. They got knighthoods. They got statues. They got their names carved into hospitals and universities. Because that is how drug empires work. You make your money destroying lives. You launder it through charity. And by the time anyone realizes what happened, you are too respectable to touch. This is the story of the Sassoon family, the opium cartel that built modern India, bankrupted China, and walked away as heroes. And if you think this is ancient history, if you think we learned our lesson, look at your medicine cabinet. Because the same playbook is running right now. The names changed, the drug changed, but the con is identical. And it is happening on an even larger scale. Let us start in 1832. A Jewish merchant family flees Baghdad. They are running from persecution from a governor who is squeezing them for money, threatening imprisonment, maybe worse. David Sassoon, the patriarch, takes his family first to Iran. Then, calculating his next move, he looks at the map and sees British India, specifically Bombay, a colonial port city exploding with trade. Cotton pouring out, silver pouring in, and most importantly, the British East India Company operating with zero oversight and infinite greed. But here is what you need to understand about what David Sassoon was walking into. The British East India Company was not a company in any modern sense. It was a corporate state. It had its own army, its own courts, its own laws. It controlled territory larger than all of Europe, and it answered to nobody except its shareholders back in London. By the 1830s, the company had colonized India not through official government action, but through pure corporate conquest. They had fought wars, annexed kingdoms, and turned an entire subcontinent into a profit center. And their biggest product, the thing that generated more revenue than anything else, was opium. David Sassoon arrives with almost nothing, but he has three things that matter more than money. He has connections. A network of merchants across the Middle East built by his father, who served as chief treasurer in Baghdad. These were not casual business relationships. These were deep family and religious ties, bonds of trust that could not be bought. In a world where contracts were hard to enforce and trust was currency, those networks were worth more than gold. He has knowledge. He understands court politics, trade routes, and how to read power. His father's position in Baghdad taught him how governments work, how officials think, and most importantly, how to position yourself as useful to people in power. And he has timing, because he arrives just as the British are solving their biggest economic problem by turning India into a drug factory. But timing alone does not make you rich. You have to understand what you are seeing. And David Sassoon understood immediately. He saw that the British had created a perfect criminal enterprise with legal protection, and he saw that there was room at the table for anyone willing to do the work they needed done. Here is the context you need to understand. Britain is obsessed with Chinese goods, tea, silk, porcelain. The British upper classes are addicted to tea. By the early 19th century, every household in Britain drinks tea daily. It is not a luxury anymore, it is a necessity. And all of it comes from China. But China does not want anything Britain makes. The Chinese look at British wool, British manufactured goods, British anything, and they are not interested. They have better silk, they have better porcelain, they have everything they need. So when British merchants show up wanting to buy tea, the Chinese say, "Fine, pay us in silver." And that is what happens. Every year, millions of pounds of silver flow out of British coffers into Chinese hands. The trade deficit is staggering. By some estimates, Britain is losing 8 million pounds of silver annually. That is hundreds of millions in today's money, just vanishing into China. And it is economically unsustainable. The empire is bleeding wealth. The British try everything. They try selling manufactured goods. No interest. They try negotiating better terms. China refuses. They try opening diplomatic channels. China is not interested in equal relationships with foreign barbarians. The Chinese emperor sees Britain as a minor tributary state, not a peer. So, the British are stuck. They need Chinese goods. China does not need British goods, and the silver keeps flowing out. This is an existential economic crisis. If it continues, Britain's entire monetary system could collapse. So, they come up with a solution, and it is one of the most evil economic strategies in history. Grow opium in India. Massive fields of poppies, cultivated under British supervision. Then flood China with it. Get millions of Chinese addicted. And suddenly, instead of Chinese merchants demanding silver for tea, Chinese addicts are paying silver for opium. The trade deficit reverses. Britain profits. India becomes a narcotics plantation, and China drowns in addiction. Let us be clear about what this means. The British are deliberately creating a drug epidemic. They are doing it with full knowledge of what opium does. Opium was already known in Europe. It was understood to be addictive and destructive. British doctors used it medically in tiny, controlled doses, but they knew that large-scale consumption led to dependency, physical ruin, and death. They knew this, and they did it anyway because the economics worked. By 1830, British India is producing over 1,500 tons of opium annually, almost all of it destined for China. The East India Company controls the entire operation. They license farmers to grow poppies. They buy the raw opium. They process it in factories. They package it in standardized chests, and they auction it off to merchants who ship it to China. The company makes money at every stage: licensing fees, processing fees, auction revenue, and taxes on the profits. By the 1830s, opium accounts for roughly 14% of British India's total revenue. 14%. That means 1 in every 7 rupees flowing into the colonial government comes from drugs. The entire financial structure of British India is built on narcotics. Roads, schools, military salaries, administrative costs, all of it funded in part by opium. This isn't a criminal enterprise operating in the shadows. This is official government policy. And this is the system David Sassoon walks into. And he sees it for exactly what it is: the opportunity of a lifetime. But here is what separates the Sassoon from everyone else trying to make money in this system. Most merchants just bought opium at auction and shipped it to China. They were middlemen. David Sassoon understood that if you want to build an empire, you do not just participate in the system, you control it. Within a few years, the Sassoon dominate the trade. Not through violence, not through intimidation, through logistics, connections, and vertical integration. They do not just sell opium, they control the entire supply chain. They finance the cultivation in India, providing loans to farmers so they grow poppies instead of food. They own the warehouses where it is stored, strategically located near ports for quick shipping. They operate the ships that carry it, building their own fleet so they are not dependent on other shippers. They run the insurance that protects those ships, creating their own insurance company to reduce costs and keep profits internal. They have agents in every port city from Calcutta to Canton, men who speak the languages, understand the local markets, and can navigate both British and Chinese authorities. And most importantly, they have the British government's blessing, because the Sassoon are not rebels. They are not fighting the system or trying to subvert it. They are collaborators, perfect partners for an empire that needs someone to do the dirty work while keeping their hands officially clean. David Sassoon positions himself as loyal, reliable, and useful. When British officials need something done, the Sassoon do it. When capital is needed for colonial projects, the Sassoon provide it. When the government needs someone to trust with sensitive trade matters, The Sassoons step forward. This relationship is symbiotic. The British get a merchant class that expands their opium trade without direct government involvement, and the Sassoon get protection, legal legitimacy, and access to the most profitable market in the world. It is the perfect partnership, and it makes both sides incredibly rich. By 1836, the Sassoon Company is shipping 30,000 chests of opium to China every year. Each chest weighs over 120 pounds. Do the math. That is 3,600,000 pounds of refined narcotics flooding into Chinese ports annually, and the scale keeps growing. By 1840, 40,000 chests. By 1850, 50,000 chests. By the late 1850s, 59,000 chests. That is over 7 million pounds of opium every year. All of it going to one destination, China. Entire coastal cities are collapsing into addiction. Families are destroyed. You have fathers smoking themselves into oblivion while their children starve. You have workers so addicted they cannot function. Shops closing because the owners are too addicted to work. Farms failing because laborers are spending their wages on drugs instead of food. Productivity craters. The Chinese government is panicking because they are watching their population and their economy disintegrate in real time, and the silver they accumulated for centuries is now flowing back out, straight into British and Sassoon hands. Every ounce of silver that left Britain for tea is coming back through opium. The trade deficit has reversed. Britain is winning, and millions of Chinese are paying the price. This is the first large-scale narcotic operation in modern history, and it is not run by criminals. It is run by businessmen with British titles operating legally under colonial law. David Sassoon is not hiding in the shadows. He is being celebrated in Bombay. He is a pillar of the community. He is funding synagogues. He is donating to charities. He is building schools. The Indian population looks at him as a generous benefactor, and the British look at him as a success story, proof that their system works, that anyone willing to work hard can prosper under colonial rule. But the Chinese see something different. They see their nation being destroyed. They see their people enslaved to a foreign substance. They see their silver vanishing and their economy collapsing, and they try to stop it. In 1839, a Chinese official named Lin Zezhu is appointed by the emperor to end the opium trade. Lin is incorruptible, he is smart, and he is determined. He arrives in Canton, the center of the opium trade, and he moves fast. He surrounds the foreign merchant warehouses. He demands they surrender all opium in their possession. And when they resist, he does not back down. He confiscates over 1,400 tons of opium. 1,400 tons from British merchants, American merchants, and others. Then he has it destroyed publicly, mixed with lime and salt, and dumped into the ocean. It is a symbolic act. China is saying, no more. We will not allow foreign merchants to poison our people. Lin Zexu writes a letter to Queen Victoria. It is formal, it is respectful, but it is devastating. He asks how Britain can morally justify selling a substance to China that is banned and controlled in Britain itself. He points out that British law recognizes opium as dangerous, that British doctors rarely prescribe it, that British society limits its use. So why, he asks, is Britain flooding China with it? Why is it acceptable to poison Chinese people but not British people? It is a reasonable question, a moral question, and the British response is to declare war. Not because Lin Zexu broke any treaty. There was no treaty. China was fully within its rights to confiscate contraband, but destroying that opium meant destroying British property, and more importantly, it threatened the entire economic model. If China could ban opium, if they could enforce that ban, the trade deficit would reverse again. Silver would stop flowing to Britain. The empire would go back to bleeding wealth. So, Britain sends gunboats. The First Opium War. 16 British warships against a Chinese military that has not fought a naval war in decades. It is not a fair fight. British ships have superior firepower, better tactics, and steamship technology that lets them move regardless of wind. They destroy Chinese coastal defenses. They blockade ports. They force China to negotiate. And the treaty that ends the war, the Treaty of Nanking in 1842, is one of the most one-sided agreements in history. China has to pay Britain 21 million silver dollars for the destroyed opium and war costs. China has to open 5 ports to British trade, not just Canton. China has to cede Hong Kong to Britain in perpetuity. China has to give British citizens extraterritoriality, meaning they are not subject to Chinese law. And nowhere in the treaty does it say opium is legal. But it does not have to, because by opening ports and granting British merchants free access, opium trade becomes impossible to stop. The floodgates are open, and the Sassoon, who backed Britain throughout the war, who provided ships and supplies and financial support, are rewarded. They get first access to the new ports. They expand their operations, and the opium trade explodes from 50,000 chests in the 1840s to over 70,000 in the 1850s. More than 8 million pounds annually. China is being systematically drugged, and the Sassoon are at the center of it. But it gets worse, because China does not accept this. They try again. In the 1850s, Chinese officials attempt to enforce anti-opium laws in the treaty ports. They try to arrest dealers. They try to confiscate shipments. And Britain sees this as a violation of the treaty. So they do it again. The Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860. This time, France joins Britain. The French want their own trade concessions and see an opportunity. Together, British and French forces destroy Chinese defenses, march inland, and occupy Beijing. They burn the old Summer Palace, one of the most beautiful architectural achievements in Chinese history, looting treasures and destroying irreplaceable art. It is cultural annihilation. And when China surrenders, the Treaty of Tientsin legalizes the opium trade explicitly. For the first time, opium is officially, legally, allowed into China. The Sassoon do not have to hide anymore, do not have to bribe officials or smuggle shipments. It is legal, sanctioned, protected, and the family's wealth explodes. By the 1850s and 1860s, the Sassoon are operating the largest private merchant empire in Asia. They are not just shipping opium, they are moving into other commodities: cotton, tea, silk. They are opening banks. They are buying real estate. They are investing in railroads and telegraph lines. Every rupee they make from opium gets reinvested into something legitimate. And this is the key to understanding how drug money becomes respectable. You do not just hoard it. You invest it. You build infrastructure. You fund industries. You employ people. You make yourself indispensable to the economy so that when someone questions where the money came from, you can point to the jobs you created, the buildings you funded, the services you provide. And suddenly the drugs become a footnote, an uncomfortable detail that people politely ignore. Now here is where it gets darker, because David Sassoon and his sons are not just selling drugs. They are building legitimacy. They are donating to charities. They are funding schools and hospitals in Bombay. They are building libraries and synagogues. David Sassoon becomes a household name not for opium, but for philanthropy. In 1847, he funds the David Sassoon Library and Reading Room in Bombay, still standing today. In 1861, he donates money for the Sassoon Dock, which becomes one of Bombay's most important commercial ports. He funds schools for Jewish children. He funds hospitals. He funds orphanages. And the Indian population looks at the Sassoon name on all these institutions and thinks, what generous people. What pillars of the community. Nobody is asking where the money came from. Or if they are not asking loudly, because the British are protecting the Sassoon, elevating them, giving them honors. In 1853, David Sassoon is appointed Sheriff of Bombay. It is a ceremonial position, but it comes with status. He is now officially part of the colonial establishment. In 1872, his son Abdullah, who goes by the English name Albert, is made a Knight Commander of the Order of the Star of India, a British title for a Jewish merchant whose fortune came from drugging China. In 1873, Albert becomes the first Jew ever granted the freedom of the City of London. Not even the Rothschilds, the wealthiest Jewish family in Europe, had received this honor yet. The Sassoon were now more respectable than the Rothschilds. Think about that. This is how you launder a drug fortune. You do not hide it, you showcase it. You plaster your name on every building. You donate so conspicuously that questioning the source becomes socially unacceptable. And you align yourself so tightly with power that attacking you means attacking the empire itself. The Sassoon understood this instinctively. Every school, every hospital, every library, every dock, it is not just charity, it is insurance. It is buying silence. It is making sure that when the history books are written, you are remembered as a benefactor, not a drug lord. And it works. To this day, in Mumbai, the Sassoon buildings are landmarks. Tourists visit them, historians study them, and almost nobody mentions the opium. In 1949, the Chinese Communist Party wins the Civil War and takes control of mainland China. And one of the first things they do is nationalize all foreign assets. Every building Victor Sassoon owns, every business, every investment, gone, seized by the state. No compensation. He loses everything overnight. Over $1 billion in today's money, just erased. Victor flees Shanghai with whatever liquid assets he can carry and relocates to the Bahamas. The Sassoon Empire in China, built over a century, is finished. Completely and totally finished. And the irony is brutal. The family that made its fortune addicting China is now being expelled by a Chinese government that rose to power, partly by promising to eliminate foreign exploitation. The Communist Party used the memory of the Opium Wars and the memory of foreign merchants like the Sassoon destroying Chinese society as propaganda to justify their revolution. The Sassoon did not just lose their assets. They became a symbol of everything China was rejecting. Meanwhile, back in England, David Sassoon and Company is also collapsing. By 1939, the family's direct involvement ends entirely. The company continues under hired management, but it is a shadow of what it was. The opium trade is over. The textile operations are declining. The investments are being liquidated. And by the 1980s, the British government declares two former partners of the firm totally unfit to serve as company directors. That is an official finding. The remnants of the Sassoon business are so badly managed, so dysfunctional, that the government steps in and bans the people running it. The empire that once controlled 70% of global opium trade, that shaped the economy of India and China, ends not with a bang, but with bureaucratic humiliation. The buildings remain, the libraries, the docks, the hospitals. They are still standing in Mumbai. But the family is gone, scattered, forgotten by most. The name Sassoon means nothing to the average person today. A few historians know the story. A few finance scholars study them as a case study in merchant empires, but they are not household names like Rockefeller or Rothschild. They have been erased from popular memory. And here is the lesson. Drug empires are always temporary. They make fortunes. They corrupt institutions. They destroy lives. But they do not last. Because eventually the market shifts, the government turns, or the family itself implodes. The Sassoons made billions in today's money. They shaped India. They addicted China. They built infrastructure that still exists. And within 3 generations, they were gone. The Sacklers are following the same path. Purdue Pharma declared bankruptcy in 2019. The family has been stripped of some assets. They paid out roughly $4.5 billion in settlements. Museums are removing the Sackler name. The Louvre removed it. The Tate in London removed it. The Metropolitan Museum of Art stopped using it. The family is being socially exiled. But here is the critical detail. $4.5 billion in settlements out of an estimated $20 billion in total wealth. That means they kept $15 billion. Most of the money is still there, hidden in offshore trusts, shielded by legal structures, distributed among family members who were not directly involved in Purdue Pharma. The family has been held accountable just enough to make headlines, but not enough to actually lose everything. And the next generation will re-emerge somewhere else under different names, running different operations. Because that is how these dynasties work. They do not disappear. They dissolve, reappear, and adapt. Look at the broader pharmaceutical industry. Johnson & Johnson, currently being sued for its role in the opioid crisis. They made the raw materials for opioid production. They knew where their product was going. They knew it was being overprescribed. They did nothing. McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal Health, the big three drug distributors, they shipped billions of opioid pills into small towns, far more than any legitimate medical need would justify. They had data showing pharmacies ordering suspicious quantities. They shipped anyway. And all of these companies are still operating, still profitable. They have paid fines, billions in total, but they are still in business because the system protects them. The opioid epidemic killed over 500,000 Americans, and the companies that caused it paid a fraction of what they made and kept operating. That is not accountability. That is a cost of doing business, and it is the same model the Sassoon used. Profit as much as possible. When pressure mounts, pay a fine or make a donation. Shift operations and keep going. The Sassoon shifted from opium to real estate. Modern pharma shifts from opioids to different drug classes. Same playbook, same result. So what should you take from this? First, understand that respectable institutions are often built on blood money. When you see a family name on a hospital wing, ask where the money came from. When you see philanthropists celebrated in the media, check their business. Because charity is how you launder a fortune and buy immunity. The Sassoon Library in Mumbai is beautiful. It is still used, but it was built with opium money. That does not erase the library, but it should change how we remember who paid for it. Second, state-backed drug operations are legal until they are not. The Sassoon operated within the law. Purdue Pharma operated within the law. Both were protected until public outrage became too loud to ignore. The system does not stop drug empires. It profits from them until it cannot anymore. And when that moment comes, the system does not dismantle the empire. It just forces them to pivot. Third, the same playbook runs over and over. Industrialize addiction. Maximize profit. Donate to institutions. Wait until the bodies pile up. Declare bankruptcy or retire and let the next generation inherit the clean money. This is not ancient history. This is the present. Opioids in the 2000s. Benzodiazepines overprescribed today. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder medications creating long-term dependency. Antidepressants withdrawal symptoms as bad as the condition they treat. Every decade, there is a new drug, a new market, a new wave of addiction disguised as treatment. Fourth, follow the money in every crisis. The Sassoon made billions, but they were not the only ones. British banks financed the trade. British insurers protected the shipments. British manufacturers built the ships. British ports processed the cargo. British officials collected taxes. The entire empire profited. And the same is true today. The Sacklers made $20 billion from Purdue Pharma. But how much did the distributors make? How much did the pharmacy chains make? How much did the doctors who overprescribed make from kickbacks and speaking fees? How much did the Food and Drug Administration officials who approved the drugs make when they left government and joined pharma boards? The opioid crisis was not just Purdue. It was the entire medical industrial complex. Every level profited, and every level is still operating. Fifth, medical systems are built on substances that create dependency. This is not conspiracy. This is business model. Antidepressants are prescribed for years, sometimes decades. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder medications create lifelong patients who cannot function without them. Pain management creates chronic users. Diabetes medications are taken for life. Blood pressure medications are taken for life. Cholesterol medications are taken for life. Modern medicine has shifted from curing disease to managing chronic conditions. And managing chronic conditions means creating permanent customers who pay monthly for the rest of their lives. The Sassoon addicted China to opium. Modern medicine calls it treatment. But the economics are identical. Create dependency, ensure repeat customers, profit for decades. History shows us that drug empires follow a cycle. They rise with state backing. They profit from mass addiction. They buy legitimacy through philanthropy. They fracture from internal conflict or external pressure. And they dissolve, leaving behind buildings with their names and graves filled with their victims. The Sassoon built modern Mumbai. They funded infrastructure that millions of Indians still use today. They also destroyed millions of Chinese lives. Both things are true. And the same will be said about the pharmaceutical empires of today. They funded research. They built hospitals. They developed medications that helped people. And they also killed hundreds of thousands through greed and negligence. Both things are true, and history will remember both. The Sassoon were called the Rothschilds of the East, a compliment at the time, a warning now, because every empire built on addiction eventually collapses. The only question is how much damage it does before it falls, and whether anyone will be held accountable. History says no. The Sassoon were not. David Sassoon died wealthy and respected in 1864. His sons inherited titles and fortunes. Albert Sassoon died in 1896, a knight of the British Empire. Their names are on buildings and in history books, mostly remembered for philanthropy, not opium. The Sacklers will not be fully held accountable either. They have paid settlements, but they kept most of the money. They have been socially exiled, but they are still billionaires. And in 50 years, their grandchildren will be funding new institutions, and people will have forgotten the opioids. Because that is how time works. It buries the bodies and polishes the legacy. And the next family running this con is already being celebrated as visionaries and philanthropists. They are funding medical research. They are endowing universities. They are building museums. And somewhere in their portfolio is a drug, a treatment, a product that is creating dependency and extracting wealth from human suffering. The trick is always the same. Make your money from human suffering, donate enough to buy silence, and wait for time to turn your crimes into history. By then, you are dead, your family is rich, and the buildings with your name become monuments to generosity instead of memorials to the bodies you left behind.